I am excited to just jump right into our first fireside chat with David Brevik, 32-year-old veteran game developer, best known for being president of Blizzard North, creating groundbreaking games such as Diablo and Diablo II. His lengthy career includes creating Hellgate London, Marvel Heroes, It Lurks Below, and many other titles. Currently president of Skystone Games, as well as being a VC advisor and creative director. Welcome, David.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, it is really nice to have you at our little roguelike conference.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's very nice for you to come and talk about the roguelikes, especially, we, of course, very interested in Diablo 1 and the roguelike influence. I have heard it said that we should perhaps call live action Diablo-likes instead of roguelikes.
Yeah, maybe. I think that when Diablo first came out, nobody knew what to call it. So it's been named all sorts of things all along. It's been many different iterations of. It was a little bit like, chocolate and peanut butter kind of thing. You put your chocolate in my peanut butter, you put my peanut butter in your chocolate. They didn't really, is this an RPG or is this an action game? Or is this what is this? I don't even understand. So maybe that Diablo has gone to be an influence for a lot of other games too. So I don't know. It's all become a mishmash now.
Yeah, I guess at the time, how much was roguelike even a term that you could be throwing around in marketing generally? Who would know what that
was? I mean, some people knew what rogue was, but I don't think the term roguelike even existed back then.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I guess, getting right into it, I know that we sometimes have very specific roguelike questions for this conference. I know one thing that came up is it seems like Angband in particular is kind of a lineage there. I know I've heard that you played a variety of kind of roguelikes in college. With something like Angband, were there any particular touchstones for influences, or was it just kind of everything that was out at the time?
Well, that was definitely a huge influence on the design. When I started making Diablo, I started designing it in high school, and started working on it. And it was originally kind of a party-based game that was similar to the other kind of party-based games at the time. There was started out with wizardry and might and magic and Bard's Tale and all a zillion types of RPGs like that. But then when I went to college, I started playing a bunch of rogue and roguelike games, and Moria and Rogue and some others were really big influences on the design, and I found myself in the computer lab playing them hour after hour after hour. And then when Moria came out, then I kind of switched to that, which later became Angband. And that was really a huge influence on what I wanted to do. So when we left, when I graduated from college, then the next thing was eventually I was going to make this Diablo game, but it had radically shifted from this party-based thing to being, well, kind of like a roguelike. But we wanted to do some other stuff, but that was the big kind of theory about what we were going to make.
Right, yeah, and I heard that the first iteration of Diablo was closer. There were a lot more of these mechanics, more single-player, turn-based, even permadeath. So what was it like moving away from that and, making the decisions of where to drop some of that and where to keep those roguelike elements? Because obviously it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, it worked out just fine. But in fact, I was really against the changes. When we pitched Diablo, it was turn-based. In fact, you can find the original Diablo pitch document that we sent out and gave to people at shows and stuff. And the original pitch document is on my Graybeard Games. That's gray with an A. graybeardgames.com website. You can go there. You can download the PDF of the original Diablo pitch. It talks about it being turn-based and permadeath and things like that. And so we had started out really kind of wanting to make that turn-based game, but it wasn't going to be kind of simple my turn your turn kind of turn-based. It was going to be turn-based with kind of like a points system. So this particular move takes, moving left or right or up or down takes 10 points, and moving diagonally takes 14 points, and things like that. So it was like kind of like time segments, or whatever you want to think of it as. So it was like the order would constantly change. It wasn't just a my turn your turn thing. But and we started making that, and that was the intent with Diablo. And then about I don't know, about 5 or so months into development, the guys, Blizzard was originally two separate independent developers. We were a development team called Condor, and the development team down south was we're in Northern California, and they're in Southern California. They were called Silicon and Synapse, and then when they got bought, they changed their name to Blizzard. We got bought, we became Blizzard North, but we were two kind of separate companies, but we shared kind of the Blizzard label and helped each other out tremendously. They did a lot of stuff. Once we were acquired, they did a tremendous amount of things for us, and we really kind of more merged into one company. But they called us up and said, "Hey, well, what do you think about changing this to real time instead of turn-based?" I was like, "God, no way do I want to do
that. Just a small suggestion.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just adamant. I was like, "There is no way I want to do that. It will ruin everything." And for me, the turn-based and stuff was really the tension in a roguelike game. And, you're going around and you're like kind of getting a little bit lazy because it gets a little easy, and then you come around a corner and then all of a sudden you get hit by, oh, there's a ancient multi-hued dragon that just came out of nowhere or something like that, and I'm really screwed now. And so
death by boredom. I've seen it called.
Yeah, exactly. It's
making the foolish mistakes.
Yeah, and then the palms are sweating, and you're like, "Oh my god, I'm going to lose this character. What am I going to do? I've spent 3 weeks on this thing, and like, this is just a disaster. I don't know how to get out of this. What the hell's in my backpack? There's got to be something to help me out here, And so I was like, I don't want to lose that tension. Like, that is really the key to making that game work. And they said, "Well, yeah, about that, we don't want it permadeath either." Oh my god. Oh my god. No, that's ridiculous. And then and so like I hung up the phone and went around the office, and I started talking about this with a few people or whatever. And like, can you believe the outrage of them wanting to turn this thing into real time or whatever? And then like a couple days go by, and then people approach me and they're like, "Yeah, we all want to turn it to real time. We don't want it to be turn based." And I'm like, "Oh man!" And so like I held out. I did all we can, and eventually it came down to a vote, and there was about, I don't know, maybe 15, 17 people, something like that, around that in the company at the time. We all gathered together in the kitchen. We had a vote, and about 4 of us wanted to keep it turn-based, and everybody else wanted to change it to real time. So we ended up giving it a try, and the moment that I tried it, I knew that it was actually the right decision for this game, for the market at the time, and things like that. It was like, this is obviously something new and really, really great. And so though it was a decision I didn't want and didn't take lightly, in the end, I was really glad that we did it.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think that is still kind of a design sensibility you've moved forward with in your career of, if you're not sure, like getting that prototype and kind of feeling it and seeing it and kind of going
absolutely
with that?
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm very into prototypes. I still make tons of prototypes. I still program almost every day, and I make prototypes of all sorts of different things. I'll have ideas and I'll prototype things, and sometimes I'll use them and a project. Sometimes I'll just put them on the shelf for later kind of thing. But I'm constantly prototyping stuff to see how it works. Even in products where, we're big budget projects, we're prototyping stuff all the time, just to see, hey, this theory sounds okay, but what does it really play like? And so that, and being the cool part about prototypes is that, you don't put a whole bunch of effort into it. So like if it's throwaway, then it's like, okay, well, that didn't work, but let's move on. And that's how I felt really about the prototype of turning the game Diablo from turn-based to real-time. When they suggested it, I was like, oh, this is going to take so long to change it in, because we were the world's worst businessmen when we made this. We originally signed the deal to do Diablo for I don't remember, like $300,000 or something like that for the whole development of the game. And it was the math doesn't even work out. And so we were desperate for more money or whatever, because we had totally blown it. And so I was like, oh, it's going to take an extra milestone. It'll take us months to do this and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, okay, yeah. So they ended up giving us a little bit more money. Eventually they ended up acquiring us. And so that all went away, which was great. The stress of that situation. But but it was like, oh, it's going to take forever. It's going to take forever. And then I started on a Friday. We sent everybody home for the weekend. And I was like, okay, because nobody could do anything while I made this big, gigantic change to the project or whatever. And so, and I had it running that afternoon. So there was in one, I don't know, in 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever it was I had it running. And you could still call it kind of prototypey, but it was obvious enough to know right away that this was something that you could play, and you could feel what it was going to be like. And so even if it had not worked out, it was not going to be a giant waste of time.
Yeah, getting there quick. Laser Walker in chat asks, what kind of stuff are you prototyping today? Is there anything fun you can mention? Like you said, you're still doing it to this day.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I don't know if I can share all of my stuff that I prototype, but I think that the thing I've been prototyping the most lately is it's a very different kind of offering for me, is a puzzle roguelike game. So I've been doing a lot of prototyping with that.
Well, that's exciting. That will be relevant to this audience for sure. Yeah, and that actually, talking about real time on the prototyping relates. We had a submitted question about that transition of figuring out what's that minimum viable rule set to get to real time out of turn based, and keeping some of that flexibility, and how much you have to change the rules, if you can keep the rules flexible enough that you don't have to throw away the work, that it kind of applies to real time, applies to turn based. Do you have any thoughts there? How do you start bridging that gap?
Well, for us, luckily, we had designed the thing so that it was this move takes 10 to move sideways, 14 to move diagonally, kind of. I just turned those into fractions of a second, and then said, okay, well, it's going to take 1.4 seconds for you to move diagonally and 1 second to move, orthogonally. And it was like, okay, well, that, things like that were pretty easy to kind of instantly, oh, I'm going to run basically 10 turns a second or whatever and see what that's like. And it didn't take very long for me to kind of prototype that. And then I could tweak the numbers, set it up so I could change them and things like that. And I had the prototype running pretty quickly. I just basically took a bunch of turns a second and then merged a lot of the data that we had already set up to kind of run in real time. There were some changes that I needed to do in terms of your turn, monster's turn, and they were going at the same time and things like that. But it wasn't really a massive amount of work. A lot of the kind of data and things like that underneath were still kind of applied. So that helped a ton.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I know that, I found it interesting looking under the hood because of the open sourceness of games like NetHack. They have a whole kind of action cost system that's even how their turn-based works. So yeah, that's really interesting that, the numbers let you convert that back and forth.
The source code for Diablo got reverse engineered. The story on that was pretty crazy. Eventually somebody somehow cracked the encryption for PlayStation 1. And
Ah,
so the PlayStation 1, we made Diablo for PlayStation 1, only we didn't make it. We had a separate developer made it. We just kind of oversaw it. We were working on Diablo 2 at the time. And so we hired somebody to port Diablo to the console. And so they had like made it and burnt came out, but they had taken it, and when they made the image for the CD-ROM for the PlayStation, which was encrypted, so they thought it was safe, they put the symbol table in the things to be encrypted onto the disc. So when they hacked and cracked the PlayStation thing, people looked at the discs and they found the symbol table for
oh my
Diablo,
goodness.
and then reverse engineered the whole thing, disassembled it, and then had the symbol table, and were able to kind of reverse engineer the code. Anyway, interesting thing. So the Diablo 1 source is out there in kind of cracked form somewhere.
Well, that's good to know. I'm sure no one here will do anything illicit to
It's crazy
have
some
a
of the
look at
things
that.
I've seen people do with that. Like they've shown me, oh, I got it running on a phone, and I got like at the end of the. It's pretty crazy what they've done with it.
Oh, that's great. Another question. So, really specifically, even the kind of walking speed, because so another point that comes up is the transition of the original Diablo quite a bit closer to roguelike, still is kind of a slower pace, and then as they go on, they get more actiony and get further from that. When did that come from? Because I know you worked on Diablo 2 as well, of that decision to start speeding up, making it more actiony. How much of that was intentional choices you went on, and how much of that was just when you were working on Diablo 1 of like, well, how far did you have time to push it at a certain point? Like, would you have wanted to make Diablo 1 as fast paced as Diablo 2, or did you do
No,
each
I
one
thought that.
intentionally and decide to step that out?
Right. I think that Diablo 1 was slow paced, and I thought that it was right for the project. I liked how slow it was, and but it was still kind of a large grid based project. Like the it was very much like making any kind of like ASCII roguelike or whatever, where it's like I generated the dungeons by hand. Like I came up with different algorithms to make the different layouts. And then I would convert the layouts, which were like, hey, there's a floor and a wall and a door and things like that, using this really complicated system that would convert that stuff into the graphics for the level. And it was all hand done for each tile set. Each tile set had a different algorithm, had a different conversion process, had different tiles that had to like be substituted in and stuff. It was a total nightmare. And so because that was like on this kind of like big grid that kind of dictated the entire way that the game played. Like you couldn't stop. You had to go move from tile to tile on a big kind of grid, and so you could only be surrounded by 8 things. And there was like the limits were very, very different. And when we made Diablo 2, we decided, well, we're going to make and here's a kind of a dumb decision we did, but this is what we went with. We went with a 5x5 grid. We took one of those tiles and we broke it down into 5x5 little micro grids. And so and then you had kind of different shapes that like really small monsters could take up 1 square. You kind of took up like a little cross shape, things like that were kind of, and so that allowed you to be surrounded by more things, have like much more flexibility in pathing, and appear much smoother. We also went with 16 direction movement instead of 8. And the animations and stuff like that, the different visuals. So there were a bunch of things that we did to kind of like change the fidelity of actual movement in the universe, and that made a huge change in actually the pace. Then there was also that combined with the fact that the number one complaint that we got was the walk when you were in town from coming out of the dungeon out to the witch or whatever to get potions was like this long ass walk, and it's like it took 30 or 40 seconds to get out there. And people were like, oh my God, I wish this game had running. So then we put running in. And we're like, oh my God, this is so cool. This is really fast. I really like the running. But then we're like, well, we can't just have people running. So let's put it in a stamina bar to make sure that they can't run all the time, which was also a really terrible decision. Anyway, so kind of long story long there. It was like kind of a bunch of micro decisions, I think, that made movement a much more fluid thing, made the possibilities of the where you moved and the where you stopped and how you could get surrounded and that kind of stuff, combined with speed, the fact that you could run, really kind of upped our game. And once you could run, then we had to have monsters that were just as fast. And so like the whole thing, like, it escalated in speed because of these kind of like micro decisions.
That's fascinating. The whole action-y, faster gameplay kind of boils down to just it was annoying to spend 30 seconds walking across the
Yes,
town.
absolutely. Exactly.
Game development. Wonderful.
Yes.
That's really cool. Yeah, and continuing kind of with some of these like deep divey questions, another thing that came up is when it comes to stuff like classes and item sets, because original Diablo, your starting class choice doesn't impact a whole lot, your initial attributes and things like that, but you can kind of build the build as you go and you can use different items. And then Diablo 2, you get skill trees, and then as it goes on, you start to get item sets so that you're not just looking at, mix and match everything individually. What was kind of like your thoughts about that shift and how it impacted things as, you got closer and closer to the idea of kind of builds being a big focus of the Diablo series?
Right. Well, one of the things that we wanted to do when we set out to make Diablo was to make basically the anti RPG at the time. It was like so many RPGs were like, oh, this is about elves and dwarves and dragons and fairies and things like that. And we're just like, we're not doing any of that. And we're going to make a bunch of scary monsters, and it's going to be creepy as hell. And it's going to be dark, and it's going to be, and so some of that stemmed to the logic of the classes. Okay, we've got a few meta classes or whatever, but it doesn't make any sense that like I'm a person, like I can pick up a sword and I can swing it. I might suck at it. Like I'm not as good as like somebody that's trained. So if you want to be trained at it, you can be a warrior, but if you're not trained at it, you can still do it. You just aren't very good at it. And so that was kind of the theory behind the character classes when we made them Diablo 1, is like anybody can do anything. Whether or not you're good at it, like your casting animations might be a lot slower than, or, faster depending on your class, or your attack animations and things like that. So it was like kind of balanced it out. In theory, it was supposed to be that anybody could do anything, but you just were bad at some stuff and better at some other things. So it's best to focus on the good things. However, what that made was just a giant soup where nobody knew what to do. And so,
right.
As
a criticism of some roguelikes, perhaps.
Yeah, and as an average consumer that's just like kind of picking up a game or whatever, it's like they didn't know what the hell they were supposed to be doing. They didn't quite understand the direction they were going in. And so that in Diablo 2, we were like, okay, we've got to guide people much better. And restrict people in many ways. It wasn't impossible to do some of the things, but it was like, it's just going to be a lot easier to use a bow because you're going to have the dexterity and strength required or whatever if you're playing the Amazon. But if you're not, you can still do it maybe, but it's not going to be as good. But it's like that's not really what you're supposed to be doing. And so like helping them with better skill design, and then making the choices of, hey, I want to be an Amazon, but look, there's a bunch of different types of ways that I can go with that. I can use bows, I can use spears. Like there's like, oh, this is different ways to play that particular character class. Narrowed it down a lot for people and it made them focus on particular things in general. Then eventually things like sets and stuff allowed us to incorporate, new ideas and put twists on everything that we had done so far, as kind of a late game kind of experience where people were like, oh, we can get these particular items, we can craft it, we can make this super powerful combination with these other skills. a lot of different combinations could come out of that. And we found that really exciting to kind of twist the gameplay at the end.
Yeah, that's really interesting how much of it comes partly from that, marketability and then also just understandability of like
Right.
Diablo was reaching a bigger audience than a lot of roguelikes were. And so, that leads to needing to, have some balance there. But, I think nowadays, modern games, you see a lot of roguelites and you see a lot of these roguelike elements coming into modern
Yeah.
games, and you see these balances like meta progression. I'm curious, hypothetically now, looking at all of the kind of ways that roguelikes have blended with the mainstream, are there any different paths you could see yourself taking, if you were back at Diablo 1 thinking about how to make it more approachable?
Sure, absolutely. But hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
Game design has changed so much in the whatever 30 years almost since Diablo, that it's not really. I mean, we started working on Diablo in '94, so like almost exactly 30 years ago, we started working on it. And so it was. There's so many ways that games have become much more sophisticated, and the internet was kind of like brand new back then and things like that. There was just lots of things about it that are just so different. Right now you've got like streaming and with Twitch and YouTube and things like that. You have communities in Discord that with real-time chat. You've got like unprecedented access to the devs and stuff, and it's really kind of a great time in many ways. Can be great, can also be grueling and terrible, especially if you screw something up, because you'll definitely get an earful. But it's really kind of fun to have a community that's really supportive and being able to do stuff together and whatnot. Kind of creates new ways to kind of create products and stuff, and kind of make games better and better, have wider audiences, have even making games, because of the gaming business is so huge now and there's so many people playing games. You can even make niche games that are just, hey, I'm going to make this particular game and it can still be successful, even though the audience isn't huge. Like it isn't like a AAA kind of product, but it can find an audience because there are so many people that are kind of dedicated to these little micro parts of gaming.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I mean, I was going to ask if you had any kind of words of advice or anything to roguelike developers now, or kind of designers in the space, since you've been, designing in it for quite a long time and, have kind of come back to that now and then. It sounds like that was a lot of the words of wisdom of kind of leaning on that community and, the
Yeah,
connectedness and the
absolutely.
breadth of games these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so important. I think some of the biggest things are like, make sure that you kind of have a vision for your product, but don't be so rigid that you are going in there blindly, like, thinking that this is the way it has to be. If you're getting a bunch of comments saying, I don't like this, and you're like, yeah, but that's the way it's got to be. That's like, you got to be asking yourself, is it really the way that it's got to be? Anyway, things like that. It's the making sure that you are getting the feedback, participating with people that you trust and understand and you believe can give you good advice. Involve them in your community, get some feedback on what you're doing, and make the product better. I mean, I learned that lesson early, changing the game from turn-based to real-time in Diablo. I listened to the outside, I gave it a try, and sure enough, it was better. It was the right decision. And so never be afraid to make changes in what your grand vision was, because almost always your end product will not be exactly the way you imagined it. Whenever you started working on it, it'll almost always change and evolve over time.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's, there's that kind of humility in it too, of being willing to be outvoted and see what
Right.
happens if you try
Yeah, I
something
don't
different.
have all the answers. The smartest person in the room isn't the person that has all the answers. It's the person that listens to everybody.
Excellent. Oh man, I think that's a good enough nugget of wisdom that we should end on that, because I think that's
All right.
wonderful. I mean, thank you so much for coming and being part of this. Yeah, it was really exciting to talk about. It's great because I think Diablo has an interesting role in the history of roguelikes, even if we don't call them Diablo-likes. So thank you for sharing
Thanks
some
so much for
stories.
having me. It was
From
super fun, and it was a pleasure talking with you. And have a good celebration.
Thank you so much. All right.